So we've talked about what is health, and to go with that, we need to talk about what is disease, or quite often in self-development referred to as dis-ease. So I've already mentioned that health and illness are personally subjective. We have our own experience of health and of disease. And we do need to understand what makes those perceptions very individual, what makes our experience individual. And our background, our conditioning, our beliefs and our values, which inform our perceptions, all go towards creating that experience. You're going to find out in this book that what disease is not actually what you might think it is, and that is kind of the purpose of the book. But we're starting at a point where we need a kind of collective understanding, or at least we need a common language as to what the general understanding of disease is. So disease is most often understood as something is broken, it's not working. Disease is usually experienced as a pattern of symptoms, as restriction, and of suffering. But actually suffering and all of the other things are two different things. It's the suffering that is the subjective part, actually, because two people could both have a bad back, but one person could perceive the suffering of that bad back quite differently to the other person. So we do need to separate out the concept and the experience of suffering from whether something is working or not working, why it might be working or not working, and what is the reason for that. But at the moment we're just talking about what is disease. So disease, I would say most people understand to be a symptom or collection of symptoms that not necessarily only cause discomfort, but limit one's quality of life and are potentially fatal. They could lead to let's call it a crash of the system, where the body can no longer cope with what's going on. And obviously we are here to survive. So when we have a disease that leads to our death, then there clearly can't be a connection between what the body's doing if it's causing us death and our need to survive. And I hope to explain that in detail later on in another chapter. We tend to be in a away from state. Okay, if we're quite happy and we're getting on with life and everything's fine, we don't tend to have a need to go to the doctors. We don't tend to have a need to go to a psychotherapist. We don't need to emotionally discharge how we're feeling to our friends. If we're healthy, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually healthy, we tend to be able to get along with life, and life seems fine and everything seems rosy. It's only when something goes wrong and we have physical pain or a physical restriction, or we have mental or emotional symptoms and we don't like what's going on, then we tend to have a need to seek help, and to seek help in being able to become healthy again. So there's an assumption almost in the absence of symptoms we're healthy, which is not always the case. Okay, we may not recognize our symptoms, we may not recognize our dis-ease when it's going on, because to us that's just truth and that's just reality, and we have become disconnected from when stress affects us and the impact that that might have on our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social well-being. So the World Health Organization talks about lack of infirmity, or that health is not just the lack of infirmity, but that it is a sense of physical, mental, emotional and social well-being. And it's a good distinction because it does bring together some of the different aspects, not all of them, but some of the different aspects that we tend to not think about in terms of health and ill health when we're focusing more on physical symptoms. We do get, we do go for help when we have physical, mental, emotional issues, but we seem to go to great lengths to avoid connecting all those things together. And we've been kind of taught to do that. We've inherited a concept of disease. We've inherited a concept of where to go and who to go to in order to get help with these things. How to reach outside of ourselves and to give our power away to somebody else to tell us how we might heal our symptoms. We go to doctors for the mechanics of our body. We go to psychiatrists and psychotherapists for the mental and the emotional aspects. What I'd like to do with this book is to connect those things back together. They never were separate. They aren't separate. But the concept of health. Look at that. The concept of disease is very much, and certainly of suffering, is very much connected with being a victim of circumstance, a victim of a situation, or not having any control or any input over what is going on. So we end up with more fear, with more confusion, with more frustration, because we can't understand what's going on. We don't like it and we don't know what to do about it, or we feel that we don't have any impact on it. And so this book is about helping us draw those connections back into our map of what's going on, so that we can know that we are the biggest influence. What we do makes the biggest difference to our health in all of the areas that we discuss. So we're not a victim of situations, of circumstances, of symptoms. We may have a lack of knowledge or awareness. We may need more support. We may need more information. But actually we are fully capable of making numerous steps that clear a pathway for health. So in order to be able to know what's going on, we need to kind of just press the pause button, and instead of being in that away from state, in trying to get away from my symptoms, we need to have a bit of a reality check and understand exactly what is going on. And the first step of being able to understand what's going on is to actually just do that full appraisal about where I am now. Instead of staying in that away from I want to get rid of this, is actually just have a look at what is really going on. And having just a clear and open-minded assessment of our current state of health. And that's our current state of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, environmental, nutritional, personal and social well-being. So if we try to take just one of those things out of this network of things, then we end up not being able to create the balance. We end up not being able to affect our threshold and our capacity for health, and we end up not being able to have the impact that we want to, because something is taking us out of balance. If we don't know what it is that's taking us out of balance, then we don't tend to be able to do something about it. So instead of focusing on one thing, we need more of a big picture view of what it is that we can do in our life to be able to impact those things. But we need to understand what's actually happening first. We need to accept what's going on and then work out what that means, so that we know what things to affect, what things to change, what things to do more of, what things to do less of. So disease or dis-ease is more than just being out of balance. It is actually entering into a state of a symptom state, and a state and a series of patterns of behavior and patterns of being and of perceiving, which we become the victim of our symptoms, of our circumstance and of our situation, where we feel we are not able to have an impact.